Well, good morning. We are in the middle of the Labor Day weekend, which is traditionally considered to be the last weekend of the summer, even though the calendar says there are still a few weeks to go. Labor Day also means it's time for kids to return to school. We'll talk about schools this morning, and it starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Bill Saunders was appointed interim superintendent of the Marquette Area Public Schools in 2013 to replace Deb Veit, who left to take on a new assignment as the superintendent of the Marquette-Alger Regional Educational Services Agency. The Marquette Area School Board later named Bill to be the school's permanent superintendent, and he's our guest this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Nice to have you with us. Let's get to know you a little better first.
Sure.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up actually in a community called Greenville, just north of Grand Rapids.
Okay.
My dad was originally a Marquette kid. He grew up in Marquette, went to Northern. He became a school teacher, and at that point in time, mid-60s, the job openings were downstate, so he moved downstate to Greenville, had a family, and that's where I grew up.
So there was a little educational experience in your background as you were growing up?
Absolutely, yeah. A household of teachers and many family members, an uncle, a great aunt, several that were in the teaching profession.
And where did you go to school?
So I went to Greenville, and then I went and I played a couple years of college basketball at Olivet College, and I ended up coming up to Northern to get my teaching credentials as well and start my teaching career. I started down in Lake City, Michigan, as a social studies PE teacher. I immediately went to Grand Valley to work on my master's program in educational leadership, and later became an athletic director, a principal, and then of course a superintendent.
Okay. You, I think, were also at Superior Central?
I was at Superior Central, yes. I was the 6-12 principal there for a little bit, and for a very short stint I was the superintendent there as well.
Okay. And you came to Marquette at Bothwell Middle School, I believe.
Came to Bothwell Middle School. Loved the middle school age group, and just that was really one of the highlights of my career, was actually to be involved with those students. It was a tough decision for me to move from Bothwell into the superintendent's role here in Marquette.
So schools are starting in a couple of days. What kind of things go through the mind of a school superintendent as that day approaches?
We have a lot of things that we try to get in order, and as we were just discussing, Marquette being the largest school in the UP, we have a lot of needs that we have to address and deal with prior to the start of the school year. Staffing first and foremost. With about 430 employees, having all our staff in order to begin the school year is something that we work on 365 days a year, but really in crunch mode right now. We have positions that, well, even within the last week, we've probably had maybe a dozen resignations in different areas. Maybe bus drivers or instructional program aides or other people that have moved, either changed careers, maybe even retired at this point in time. So we're constantly filling those positions, making sure that we have the staff in place to really put our program in place to start this school year. That's one piece. We have transportation, getting our bus routes out as we have new kids every year. That's another piece that we try to put into place. Making sure that our security measures and other things are good to go. A lot of new professional development, new curriculum that we're trying to get distributed. We bought probably 900 to 1,000 computers that we're trying to get into play as we circulate out some of the older computers that we had and bring new technology into circulation. So constantly getting everything ready for the start of the beginning of school.
Certainly, as a school system the size of Marquette, you must depend on others
Absolutely, it's completely a team effort. We have a great team at Marquette Area Public Schools, and yeah, all that doesn't fall on me, but you know, a lot of it I try to interact in all the different areas and have a role of some sort, and that's what school systems are like now. we've had to scale back so much on staffing. We have a lot of people that are involved in a lot of the different areas.
One of the things is nowadays schools everywhere in Michigan depend on the state for much of their funding.
Absolutely.
And the state has not passed a budget yet. So what does that mean for you and for other schools as they try to plan for the upcoming school year?
Well, it's certainly first and foremost deep concern, and as we follow the news right now, it's the first time in 9 years that we haven't had a budget in place to start the school year. So when our school board passes our budget at the end of June to start July 1, we're using numbers that we don't know. We're taking a best guess scenario of what that might look like. We just passed a budget deficit of about $1.5 million. Now that deficit could balloon and turn out to be $2 million, or there's probably an outside chance that maybe the numbers we use for school funding might help reduce that budget deficit a little bit.
How do you make those assumptions? Kind of strike a middle ground?
We did. We tried to look at what the governor had proposed, what we saw come out of the House as far as a budget proposal, and what we saw come out of the Senate as a budget proposal, and we kind of looked at that and we made a conservative guess on where the three different budget proposals were, and that's what we used as our baseline assumptions.
And you're kind of fighting roads this year for a share of that budget.
Absolutely, we're fighting roads and a lot of other state needs, and you know, that's always a concern for us is where does education fall? Obviously, if you're in the education business and looking to educate kids, you're hoping that you become a priority, but different years based on state needs, we may be a high priority, we may be a little bit lower priority. Okay. A prime example of that, over the last 5 years, the funding, the per pupil allocation, which is how we're funded based on how many students you have, the state has been between about $7,200 per student, and this last year we were about $7,800 per student. But that increase has only been 3 out of the last 5 years, it's been less than 2% of an increase for us. We had 1 year about 3.5%, 1 year 4%, but it was even less than a 1.5% in those 3 years. And so when you're dealing with those types of minimal increases that don't meet cost of living increases that we see, it makes it really difficult to not only budget for staff salaries and things like that, but for other increases like infrastructure. You know, districts aren't able to pocket enough of that foundation allowance to put a new roof on, to repair parking lots, to do a lot of those infrastructure needs that we need.
We'll talk about some other issues in
Sure.
just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report just 2 minutes from now. Again, our guest this morning is Bill Saunders, the superintendent of Marquette Area Public Schools. We were talking about, finding teachers, and there was a time, when it seemed that getting a teaching job was really in high demand. And now it seems that may not be quite as true. Is that correct?
That is correct. I think a lot of that has to do with where we're at from a funding standpoint. It also has to do with other areas that are exploding, technology in other areas that are paying, a lot better than what those teaching jobs are potentially paying right now. As a state, as they've looked to help districts with budget and other issues, they've put caps on retirement. They've put caps on what districts can, as far as benefits go, for like insurance and things like that. So those things have deteriorated a little bit at what maybe at one time made teaching look a little bit more lucrative than what it does today.
So bottom line, we probably have less people going into teaching.
Absolutely, we do have a lot less people going into teaching right now. Huge shortages, not just in Michigan, but nationwide shortages, and in all fields related to education. So not just teaching, but bus drivers, secretaries, administrators. As we put ads out now and look to attract folks, I can remember just before I started as superintendent, about 2012, the state had a buyout for teachers, and we had about 31 teachers retire. And we were getting 300 to 400 applicants for each of those openings. And what we see now, elementary, we still see a pretty good applicant pool, 30 or so applicants for an elementary teaching job, but some of the specialty jobs, special education, high school math, high school science, we may see single digits, or in some cases we don't get any applicants at all.
Okay. You were a guest here last year, and the subject was a special report we had
Sure.
on school safety. And we were kind of waiting at that time for the state to come out with, they appointed a special task force. Did anything ever come of the recommendations they came up with?
No, we haven't seen anything come along with those recommendations at this point. They did have another round of security grants that they put out that Marquette had applied for. The state is still trying to hit schools for a first time. We were actually part of the initial grant that came out, and we secured a panic pendant. It was about a $55,000 grant, where our teachers' staff can instantly hit a button. It sends a 911 call out. That was one of the first grants that we received. And we've applied for many grants since then, but they still haven't hit all the schools in Michigan, so we're not eligible for another round of grants until every school in Michigan has at least been part of that pool.
Even without grants, I know you have put a lot of effort into it, and particularly on making the schools more secure.
We have, and we've been blessed with our local taxpayer passed a sinking fund for us 5 years ago, and that's a millage increase, a tax that we get every year. That our taxpayer doesn't have to pay interest on. So it's one-time monies each year that come into the district, about $1 million. And we've been able to take that money each year, a whole host of infrastructure needs that we have, but we've prioritized security above all other infrastructure needs. So we've redone building entrances to make them secure. We've put in technologies to be able to lock down buildings and offices and things like that to prevent entrance if we have to. We've put more money and resources into systems like panic pendants, cameras, securities, those types of things to ensure a safe school environment. And probably above all else, and I talked about this last time, an investment in that school liaison officer, and actually we're looking, hopefully in the near future here, to maybe add a second school liaison officer for Marquette Area Public Schools.
And I think it's important, and we have to take a break pretty soon, but for people to understand, this just isn't a guy walking around with a gun on his belt. He's someone who really interacts with...
He interacts with the students, and when you have 3,300 students, that's where the shortfall comes in, is he doesn't have enough time to interact with all the students that we would really like him to. But with the elimination of DARE programs and things like that, he's in the classroom teaching about drug and alcohol safety. He's talking with students. He's building those relationships. So if somebody sees something out of the ordinary, it's more likely going to be a student with 3,300 students based on the amount of staff that we have. They feel confident they can go to him and let him know that there's an issue that might be potentially coming about.
Okay, got some more questions. We'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on today's show after we take one more break. Again, our guest this morning is Bill Saunders from the Marquette Area Public Schools, Superintendent of Schools. Bill, let's talk about education in general and the way the state gets involved in our school systems today. How much of the educational programs are really mandated by the state?
Almost exclusively it's mandated by the state. That state curriculum that we have, we follow what's called the Michigan Merit Curriculum. Every district has to have each student pass that Michigan Merit Curriculum now for graduation. It's a requirement. It's 4 years of math, 3 years of science, 3 years of social studies, 4 years of English language arts. So they pretty much have a mandate of what each student should have or has to have in order to graduate. Now there's some areas where like with foreign language, it was a 2-year mandate that every student had to have with foreign language. They've relaxed that a little bit. It's now 1 year, and we can use like a performing art or a practicing art to fill in for that second requirement, which gives students a little bit more leeway. Many districts have gone to a 6 or 7 period schedule. Like Marquette has, we have a 7-period schedule, so we have the ability to build in some added time for students to be able to take some of those non-required electives that really enhance the education for each of the students.
And the state kind of went through a period where they were really focusing on, I would say, college prep.
Absolutely.
And then had a realization later that you can't ignore career technical education. So
Yep.
they've kind of swung back a little bit in that direction.
That pendulum continues to swing, and it's really right now in that career and technical education. We see more and more grants and starting to see areas where the state's looking to fund some of those career and tech areas a little bit more heavily than what they have in the past. So that's been really positive for us. You've seen growth in programs like the Middle College that students are participating in now. Where they start to get those college credits while they're in high school. Those are career and tech fields that those students are primarily taking through the Middle College. We also see like our advanced placement courses where students are taking those courses in high school for college credit as well.
I know that's an area where Marquette has done very well with.
We've done very well. We have 12 advanced taught in our own buildings, 12 AP courses. Students do have the ability outside of the 12 AP courses that we offer to go online and also take AP courses. And we have a great success rate. Over 70% of our students that enroll in an AP course pass the AP exam. In a lot of cases, that's 3 and 4 credits of college that they get just for the cost of the AP exam, which is pretty minimal.
I know school boards evaluate superintendents and other personnel are evaluated.
Absolutely.
But in many cases, it's like all of us. We kind of evaluate ourselves.
Yep.
And what do you base your evaluation on? And what makes you feel good about the school system? If what things do you look at?
Absolutely. One of the things that one of the words that we've used quite a bit is transformational learning, and how quickly are we adapting to what the students need to learn as we move forward. So as we see this race for technological skills, how quickly are we advancing to meet those student needs? Are we staying in the past? Or are we turning our programs over at a rate where we can meet the needs of what careers in college readiness that is expected at the next level for our students? And that's one of the primary areas that we focus. We take a look at student success, graduation rates, even student attendance rates. As we've seen in this new technology age that we have, we've also seen a sharp decline in student attendance. We see, mental health issues, all kinds of other things where we see more and more students that are potentially staying home. So how are we getting those kids involved, getting those kids back into the school fold to make sure they're successful and they're going to graduate and certainly be productive students?
Okay. Well, thanks for coming in. It's very interesting, and I certainly wish you the best as you kick off a new school year.
I appreciate it. We're looking forward to the 1920 school year. Things are going really well in Marquette Area Public Schools, again, in large part to the fact that we have tremendous parent and community support, and without that support, Marquette Public Schools wouldn't be where it is. But with that support behind us, we're going to continue to excel on behalf of our students.
Okay, very good. I'll have some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. Back to school. It's an experience we all have in common. We've all done it, although for some of us it was a long time ago. We tend to think of schools as being pretty much the same from generation to generation. School year starts in the fall around Labor Day, continues until early June. Typically we take a couple of big breaks at Christmas and Easter, but now we call them winter and spring breaks. For most schools, we put 20 or 30 kids in a classroom to be taught by one teacher. It's kind of been that way forever. Often the teacher was a woman when we were kids, with a few men at the middle and high school level. We did start to see more men coming into teaching a while back, but that may be changing now that there seems to be less interest in teaching as a career. Did you ever bring an apple for the teacher? For many years, it was a time-honored tradition. Bing Crosby even recorded a song called An Apple for a Teacher. The lyrics included, "An apple for the teacher will always do the trick when you don't know your lesson in arithmetic." Obviously from a simpler time. Or how about getting new clothes for school? You couldn't start the school year in old clothes after all. Does that tradition continue? Well, based on the back-to-school ads I see on television, all the retailers think it should. The first day of school affects people in different ways. The mom sending her first one off to kindergarten might be anxious and even sad to see the little one go. But by the time the kids get to later elementary or middle school, most parents can't wait to send them out the door for the first day of school. But despite what we may think, schools have changed. Technology has played a role. Laptops and iPads are common tools in the classroom today, and the kids using them often know how they work even before they get to class. Matter of fact, many early elementary students know more about using all the new technology than their grandparents do. One of the things that seems to have changed, surprisingly, is math. Now, you wouldn't think something that's been around for all these years would change. It's true that 2 and 2 is still 4, but when it comes to multiplication and division, the way you're supposed to solve the problem has changed. I think it's actually a plot against parents and grandparents, as I'm guessing some of you have experienced. The answers are still the same. It's the way you do the problem that's changed. When you're helping your granddaughter, it's frustrating when you know what the answer is, but can't explain how to get there with the new systems. A couple of thoughts as I look back on my own school days. I do remember how I would often ask myself, why do I have to learn this? I'm never going to have to know history or geography or English. Then I became an adult and learned that history and geography can be interesting, and English can be pretty valuable when you do a weekly TV show and have to write some closing thoughts each week. Just think how much better it could be if I had actually paid attention in Miss Vivian's English class. I'll be back in a minute. Time for us to make way for the Today Show, which will be here in a moment. Remember, you can also see us on the internet at uppermichigansource.com. Thanks to Marquette Area School Superintendent Bill Saunders for joining us this morning to talk about the opening of the new school year. And thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again next Sunday morning.